The Council of Voices had not spoken in harmony for 3 cycles. Ambassador Kethvar watched the floating crystalline forms of his people dim and brighten in rapid succession, each pulse a disagreement, each flicker a desperate attempt at consensus. Their world was dying, and they had exhausted every option except the one that violated their most sacred beliefs. The humans, Elder Mothrin's voice carried through the chamber like wind through broken glass. We speak of the humans as if they were not the youngest species to achieve interstellar flight, as if they had not stumbled into the galaxy barely 200 years ago, crude and violent. Kethvar's form pulsed a soft blue, the color of reluctant agreement. Yet their military defeats speak louder than our philosophy, Elder. The Vorth Empire fell to human tactics in 18 standard months. The Crimson hegemony lasted only slightly longer. The chamber fell silent. Every being present had witnessed the recordings. Humanity's wars were not won through superior technology or overwhelming numbers. They won through something the rest of the galaxy had never encountered before, an absolute refusal to accept defeat, even when logic demanded surrender. Their methods are. Elder Zephtera paused, her form cycling through several colors before settling on a muddy brown of distaste. Unethical. They sacrifice individuals for group survival. They employ deception as a primary strategy. They show mercy to enemies while simultaneously planning their destruction. And yet they win. Kethvar repeated quietly. The THK homeworld had been under siege for 2 years. The Devourers had arrived without warning, as they always did. Massive organic ships that consumed entire ecosystems, leaving behind dead worlds and moving on to the next system. 17 civilizations had fallen before them. Each had fought with honor, using established galactic protocols for warfare, following the ancient codes that governed conflict between sentient species. Each had died gloriously and completely. The THK possessed some of the most advanced defensive technologies in the galaxy. Their energy shields could deflect antimatter bombardments. Their weapons could slice through neutronium hulls. Their tactical computers could calculate battle outcomes with 97% accuracy. None of it mattered against an enemy that consumed matter itself to fuel their reproduction. The humans have never faced the Devourers, Elder Yithmon observed, his form a skeptical orange. Their victories against conventional enemies prove nothing about their ability to defeat a force of nature. They have faced extinction before. Kethvar had studied the human records extensively. Their homeworld nearly died 7 times in their recorded history. Asteroid impacts, climate shifts, global wars that should have ended their species. Each time, they adapted instead of accepting fate. Adaptation is not victory against the Devourers, Mothrin said. The Kelvari adapted. They developed consumption-resistant materials, energy forms the Devourers could not digest. It delayed their end by 3 months. The chamber's lighting dimmed as the council processed this. Through the transparent walls, they could see their world's second moon, now completely dark. The Devourers had finished consuming it the previous cycle, adding its mass to their ever-growing fleet. The humans have a saying, Kethvar continued. They claim that it is better to die on your feet than live on your knees. But they have another saying that contradicts the first. Survival justifies any action. Contradictory philosophy leads to contradictory behavior, Zephtera observed. How can we trust beings who cannot maintain consistent ethical frameworks? Perhaps, Kethvar said slowly, consistency is not what we need against an enemy like this. The debate had raged for days. The THK were telepathic, their crystal-based biology naturally harmonizing thoughts and emotions across their entire population. Individual survival instincts had been bred out of their species millennia ago, replaced by collective decision-making and shared consciousness. They fought as one, thought as one, died as one. It had made them powerful. It had also made them predictable. Show them the latest projections, Elder Hithyar requested. Her form had been steadily darkening throughout the session, indicating deep distress. The central hologram shifted, displaying their system. Red markers showed Devourer positions. The enemy fleet had grown by 30% since beginning their assault, feeding off the consumed moon. Conservative estimates suggested the main world had perhaps 40 cycles before complete consumption. Our children ask questions we cannot answer, HFY continued. They feel our fear through the connection. They know we are dying, and they trust us to find solutions. What do we tell them when traditional warfare has failed? The humans will demand payment, Mothrin said. They are a capitalistic species. Nothing they do comes without price. What price could matter if we cease to exist? Kethvar asked. The question hung in the air. The THK had never hired mercenaries. Their culture viewed it as a fundamental moral failure, an admission that their own principles were insufficient to protect their people. To seek aid from outsiders suggested that their collective wisdom had limits. To seek aid from humans suggested something worse. They will want to study us, Yithmon predicted. Their scientists are notorious for treating other species like laboratory subjects. They will demand access to our technology, our biology, our historical records. They will want military bases in our territory, Zeftera added. Permanent installations that compromise our sovereignty. They collect strategic advantages like their traders collect profit. They will want cultural exchange programs, Hithyar said, her voice barely audible. They will want our children to learn their languages, adopt their customs, think their thoughts. We have seen what happens to species that ally closely with humans. They become something else. The chamber fell silent again. Every council member understood the implication. Humanity's closest allies had indeed changed after extended contact. The proud warrior culture of the Mandorian clans now included human concepts of combined arms tactics and psychological warfare. The gentle philosopher-poets of Zirian Prime had developed human-influenced concepts of individual achievement and competitive improvement. Neither species had become human, exactly, but they were no longer what they had been before contact. The alternative is extinction, Kethvar said simply. If we maintain our purity by dying, what have we preserved except the memory of what we were? Through the chamber walls, the first signs of atmosphere bleeding became visible as thin streams of gas escaping into space. The Devourers had begun preliminary consumption of the outer atmospheric layers. Soon, the real assault would begin. I have already made preliminary contact, Kethvar announced. The Human Colonial Defense Force responded within 6 hours of my initial transmission. They are interested in our situation. The council erupted in surprised pulses of light. Several elders shifted to angry red frequencies. You exceeded your authority, Mothrin accused. This decision required full council approval. This decision required action before the council reaches consensus, Kethvar replied calmly. By the time we agree on a course of action, there may be no one left to implement it. What did you tell them? Hithyar asked. The truth. That we face an enemy we cannot defeat with conventional methods. That our civilization will end unless we receive assistance. That we are prepared to negotiate compensation for their aid. And their response? Kethvar hesitated. The human reply had been characteristically blunt and difficult to interpret within THK cultural frameworks. They said they would send a negotiation team to discuss terms. They also said, he paused, translating the human phrase carefully, that extinction was a waste of good real estate. Real estate? Zeftera pulsed confused yellow. They view our homeworld as property to be claimed. I believe it was their attempt at humor, Kethvar said. Humans often make jokes when discussing serious topics. Their psychological profiles suggest this helps them process stress. They find our potential extinction humorous? Mothrin's form flared angry orange. No, Elder. I think they find it unacceptable. The joke suggests they have already decided to act, and are merely determining the most effective approach. The distinction was important in human psychology, as Kethvar had learned during his years studying their species. Humans rarely wasted time debating whether to help those in need. They argued about how to help, how much to charge, and what conditions to impose. But the basic decision to act seemed almost automatic. It was, perhaps, the most alien thing about them. When will they arrive? Hithyar asked. Their advanced team should reach our system within 12 cycles. They travel faster than our projections suggested possible. Advanced team? Yithmon questioned. Apparently, they do not send military forces without first conducting detailed intelligence gathering. The team will assess our situation, evaluate enemy capabilities, and determine what level of intervention is required. And if they determine intervention is not possible, Kethvar had asked the human negotiator the same question. The response had been another example of their peculiar directness. They said they would figure something out anyway. I am uncertain what this means in practical terms. The council processed this information. Human unpredictability was legendary, but it cut both ways. They might accomplish the impossible, or they might fail spectacularly while attempting it. We have violated the code of voices, Mothrin said finally. For the first time in our recorded history, we seek salvation from outsiders rather than finding it within ourselves. Perhaps, Kethvar replied. The code was written by people who never faced extinction. Or perhaps, Hithyar added quietly, we have simply reached the limits of what our philosophy can achieve. The chamber's harmonics shifted as the council members absorbed this heretical thought. Their entire civilization was built on the principle of collective self-sufficiency. To admit it had limits was to question the foundation of their society. The children are listening, Zephtera observed. Through their mental connection, young Carry across their world could sense the council's emotional turmoil. They know we are afraid. Then, let them also know we are taking action, Kethvar said. Let them feel our determination alongside our fear. And if the humans demand too high a price? If their terms require us to compromise everything we believe? Kethvar's form pulsed a slow, steady blue. Then, we will have 12 cycles to find a better alternative. But, privately, he suspected no better alternative existed. The humans were coming, bringing with them their strange philosophy of victory at any cost, and their proven ability to defeat seemingly impossible odds. What they would cost the Carry remained to be seen. What they would save might be equally unknowable until the end. Outside the chamber, the second moon's debris began falling toward their world as the Devourers continued their feast. Time was running out, and salvation was on its way in the form of the most morally questionable allies the galaxy had ever produced. The irony was not lost on any council member. In seeking to preserve their civilization, they might be ensuring its transformation into something unrecognizable. But transformation, Kethvar reflected, was preferable to extinction. Even if it felt like heresy to think so. The human ship arrived ahead of schedule, dropping out of hyperspace with a violence that set every Carry sensor array screaming warnings. Most species announced their presence with careful deceleration and polite communication protocols. The humans simply appeared, moving at speeds that should have torn their vessel apart, then somehow stopped without any visible means of deceleration. Captain Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the CNS Defiant, watching the alien world grow larger on her displays. Her ship was not the largest in the Colonial Defense Force fleet, nor the most heavily armed, but it specialized in situations exactly like this one. First contact with desperate species, preliminary threat assessment, and rapid deployment of whatever solution seemed most likely to work. Ma'am, we're receiving that telepathic broadcast again, Communications Officer Martinez reported. The aliens are, they're trying to connect with our minds directly. Negative on mental contact, Chin replied immediately. Standard protocol when dealing with telepathic species. We don't know if they're trying to communicate or control us. The Carry had been broadcasting their thoughts in all directions since the human ship entered the system. Emotional resonance of fear, hope, and confusion washed over them in waves that their instruments could detect, but their minds could not interpret. It was like listening to a conversation in a language that existed as pure feeling rather than words. Tactical assessment, Commander Willis? Chin asked her weapons officer. The Devourers are impressive, Captain. I count 47 organic ships, largest approximately 12 kilometers in length. They're consuming the planetary atmosphere at an estimated rate that gives the surface maybe 30 days of breathable air. And the aliens' defenses? Extensive, but ineffective. They have energy weapons that should be devastating anything they hit. But the Devourers just absorb the energy and use it to accelerate their consumption rate. It's like trying to fight a forest fire with gasoline. Chin studied the tactical display. The Carry had been fighting for their lives for 2 years, throwing everything they had at an enemy that grew stronger with each attack. Classic human military doctrine would have called for immediate retreat and regrouping. The fact that the aliens had continued fighting a losing battle for this long suggested either stupidity or courage. Given their advanced technology and sophisticated civilization, she was betting on courage. Science Officer Park, what do we know about these devourers? Lieutenant Park pulled up her analysis on the main screen. They're unlike anything in our biological databases, Captain. The ships appear to be living creatures, but they're too large to have evolved naturally. Best guess is they're artificially created or heavily modified organisms. Weaknesses? Unknown. They consume organic matter, metals, even energy itself. They reproduce by consuming mass and converting it directly into new ship creatures. Standard weapons seem to feed them rather than damage them. What about non-standard weapons? Park hesitated. That's where it gets interesting, Captain. Human military doctrine emphasizes non-standard approaches. We might have options the aliens haven't considered. Chen nodded. The HFY fought like civilized beings, following established rules of warfare that had been developed over thousands of years of galactic history. Humans had been part of galactic civilization for barely 2 centuries, and they had spent that time systematically breaking every rule of warfare that existed. Incoming transmission from the alien government, Martinez announced. On screen, the main display shifted to show Ambassador Kethvar, his crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. The universal translator rendered his thoughts into speech, though something was clearly lost in the conversion. His words came out stilted and formal, lacking the emotional resonance that his people used for natural communication. Captain Chen, we welcome you to our system. We are grateful for your arrival. Ambassador Kethvar, I presume. We received your request for assistance. Before we discuss terms, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Kethvar's form shifted through several colors before settling on blue. The Devourers arrived without warning 2 years ago. They consume everything. We have thrown our entire military force against them, and they have only grown stronger. Your people seem to have been fighting honorably, Chen observed, following established galactic warfare protocols. Of course, war has rules, Captain. Without rules, conflict becomes mere violence. Chen exchanged a glance with Commander Willis, who was trying not to smile. Humans had been accused of turning warfare into mere violence by pretty much every species they had ever fought against. It was usually meant as an insult. Ambassador, has your species considered less conventional approaches? I do not understand. What approaches could be more effective than our current strategy? Well, Chen said carefully, human military theory suggests that when conventional tactics fail, unconventional tactics become necessary. Such as, Chen pulled up a preliminary tactical assessment her crew had been working on during their approach. Psychological warfare. Biological weapons designed to target specific genetic markers. Nuclear attacks on civilian populations to demoralize the enemy. Systematic destruction of food supplies to induce starvation. Kethvar's form flared bright red with shock. Captain, such methods violate every principle of civilized warfare. They are evil. They are effective, Chen replied calmly. The question is whether your species prefers moral purity or survival. The transmission went silent for several long moments. Through their sensors, the human crew could detect massive bursts of telepathic activity across the alien world as Kethvar presumably reported their conversation to his government. Captain, Park said quietly, I don't think we should be suggesting war crimes as opening negotiating positions. Lieutenant, I'm not suggesting we commit war crimes. I'm establishing that we think differently about warfare than they do. They need to understand that hiring humans means accepting human methods. The transmission reactivated. Kethvar had been joined by several other aliens, their forms pulsing in various colors that suggested intense debate. Captain Shun, our council finds your suggestions disturbing. However, we are curious about one thing. You speak of attacking civilian populations, but the Devourers have no civilians. Their entire species exists as mobile military units. Interesting point, Chen agreed. That does simplify the moral equation. When your enemy is entirely military, certain ethical constraints become irrelevant. What exactly are you proposing? Chen activated a tactical hologram showing the Devourer fleet. Preliminary analysis suggests these creatures operate as a collective organism. Individual ships may have specialized functions within the larger group. Our scientists reached similar conclusions. We have been unable to identify which ships serve which functions. that's where human intelligence gathering methods become useful. We specialize in learning about our enemies through direct investigation. Direct investigation? Commander Willis stepped forward. Ambassador, how many prisoners has your military captured during 2 years of warfare? Kethvar's confusion showed in rapid color shifts. Prisoners? The Devourers do not surrender. When their ships are damaged, they consume themselves to fuel the remaining fleet. Right? See, that would never work against humans. We don't just fight enemies, we study them. We capture specimens, conduct interrogations, perform biological analysis. The Devourers cannot be interrogated. They are not individually sentient. Everything can be interrogated, Ambassador. It's just a matter of finding the right methods. Chen was watching the aliens carefully. Their reaction to human methods would determine what kind of assistance her government would be willing to provide. If the HFY were too rigid in their moral framework, humans might not be able to work with them effectively. What would you need to conduct this investigation? Kethvar asked finally. Complete tactical support from your military, unrestricted access to your scientific databases, and authorization to use whatever methods prove necessary to gather intelligence. Authorization to use whatever methods prove necessary. Kethvar repeated slowly. Captain, that is an extremely broad grant of authority. Ambassador, you contacted us because conventional methods have failed. If you want conventional solutions with conventional limitations, you should have contacted someone else. Another pause for consultation. Shin could see Willis running calculations on his tactical display, probably estimating how long their ship could survive in direct combat with the Devourer fleet. The answer was not encouraging. Our weapons are ineffective against these creatures, Kethvar said when the transmission resumed. What makes you believe human weapons would be more successful? We don't, Shin admitted. But human weapons are designed around different principles than yours. Your energy weapons feed them. Our kinetic weapons might not. Kinetic weapons? You mean mass drivers. Among other things. Humans never gave up projectile weapons entirely, even after developing energy-based systems. Sometimes you need to hit something with a big chunk of metal moving very fast. Primitive technology. Effective technology. There's a difference. Park brought up a comparison chart showing human and HFY weapon systems. The aliens' energy weapons were indeed more advanced, capable of incredible precision and devastating power output. Human weapons looked crude by comparison. The thing about sophisticated enemies, Chin explained, is that they develop sophisticated defenses. These Devourers have obviously adapted to counter energy weapons. They probably haven't encountered kinetic weapons in centuries. And if kinetic weapons also prove ineffective, then we try something else. Humans are good at adaptation, Ambassador. We keep trying new approaches until something works. And if nothing works? Chin smiled, though she wasn't sure the aliens could interpret human facial expressions. Ambassador, human military philosophy includes a concept called acceptable losses. If we can't save your entire civilization, we'll try to save part of it. If we can't save any of it, we'll make sure these Devourers pay such a high price for victory that they think twice before attacking anyone else. You would sacrifice yourselves to achieve vengeance. We would sacrifice ourselves to protect the larger galactic community. These creatures have already destroyed 17 civilizations. Someone needs to stop them, even if the cost is high. The transmission went silent again. Shin could imagine the philosophical crisis this conversation was creating among the HFY leadership. They were being offered salvation by a species that admitted to being willing to commit atrocities in pursuit of victory. Captain, Martinez interrupted, I'm detecting massive energy spikes from the Devourer fleet. They appear to be accelerating their consumption rate. Time pressure, Ambassador, Chun told the aliens. Your world is running out of atmosphere. How long do you need to make a decision? The Council requires consensus before authorizing. How long? Kethvar's form pulsed rapidly through several colors. Standard consensus procedures require a minimum of 3 cycles. You have maybe 20 cycles of breathable air left. Do the math. Captain, surely you understand that moral decisions cannot be rushed. Ambassador, moral decisions get people killed when you're facing extinction. My government authorized me to begin immediate protective measures if your situation is as critical as you described. Protective measures? Chun turned to Willis. Commander, implement Protocol 7. All human personnel to battle stations. Protocol 7, I Captain. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship. On the alien transmission, Kethvar's form flared with alarm colors. Captain, what are you doing? Ambassador, we're going to buy you time to make your decision. My ship is going to engage the Devourer fleet and conduct our preliminary investigation. Captain, your single vessel cannot possibly watch us. Chen cut the transmission and turned to her crew. Through the bridge windows, the Devourer fleet loomed like a living nightmare. 47 massive organisms that had consumed 2 solar systems and 17 civilizations. Ma'am, Willis said quietly, our chances of survival against that fleet are approximately. I don't want to hear about our chances, Commander. I want to hear about theirs. The Defiant began accelerating toward the enemy fleet, moving with the kind of reckless aggression that had made humanity notorious throughout the galaxy. They were going to attack an obviously superior force without backup, without adequate intelligence, and without any guarantee of success. It was, Chen reflected, the most human thing they could possibly do. And sometimes, being human was exactly what the situation required. The first human attack came without warning or honor, striking at the smallest Devourer ship with weapons that should not have existed in civilized warfare. Captain Chen's crew had spent 6 hours studying the enemy fleet before launching what they called a probe attack, a concept that violated every established principle of galactic combat ethics. Ambassador Kethvar watched from the THCarry Command Center as the human vessel fired a stream of metal projectiles at velocities approaching significant fractions of light speed. The crude kinetic weapons punched through the Devourer's energy-absorbing hull like ancient spears through fabric. Impossible, Elder Mothrin pulsed deep purple confusion. Those are primitive mass drivers. No civilized species has used kinetic weapons for warfare in over 2,000 years. The humans are not civilized, Kethvar observed. That appears to be their primary advantage. The targeted Devourer reacted with alien fury, its biomechanical hull rippling as it attempted to absorb the kinetic energy of the projectiles. But kinetic energy was different from directed energy weapons. Instead of feeding the creature, the impacts created massive structural damage that spread through its organic systems like an infection. The creature is wounded, reported Tactical Coordinator Vithel. Actual physical damage, not just energy absorption. How is this possible? Because the humans think differently, Kethvar said. While we developed increasingly sophisticated energy weapons, they apparently kept building better ways to throw rocks at their enemies. The wounded Devourer began consuming its own damaged tissue, converting the injured sections into energy to fuel rapid regeneration. Within minutes, the damage was completely repaired. But the human ship had already moved on to its next target. They are not trying to destroy individual ships, Elder Zephtera realized. They are conducting experiments. Each human attack was different. Kinetic rounds, followed by what appeared to be chemical explosives, then exotic energy weapons that the THCarry sensors could not identify. The Devourers responded to each attack, demonstrating their adaptive capabilities while the humans carefully recorded every defensive mechanism. Captain Chun is treating our enemy like a laboratory specimen, Kethvar said. She is learning their capabilities through direct experimentation. Using her crew as expendable test subjects, Mothrin added with obvious disapproval. But the human ship was not behaving like expendable test subjects. Instead of pressing attacks that proved ineffective, they immediately disengaged and tried new approaches. When energy weapons proved counterproductive, they abandoned them entirely. When kinetic weapons showed limited success, they began testing different projectile compositions and velocities. They adapt faster than the Devourers, Vithel observed with grudging admiration. Each attack incorporates lessons from the previous engagement. The human combat doctrine was becoming clear. Rather than committing to a single battle plan and fighting to victory or death, they treated each engagement as an opportunity to gather intelligence for the next engagement. It was systematic, ruthless, and completely without honor. It was also working. Captain Chen's vessel is requesting communication, the communications elder announced. Put her through, Kethvar ordered. Captain Chen appeared on the main display, her face showing none of the emotional distress that any civilized being would display after hours of violent combat. She looked calm, focused, and slightly pleased. Ambassador, we've completed our preliminary assessment. The good news is that these creatures can be killed. The bad news is that killing them is going to require methods your people will find morally objectionable. Explain. The Devourers regenerate damage by consuming their own tissue and converting it to energy. But regeneration has limits. If we can cause damage faster than they can repair it, their regeneration systems will be overwhelmed. How much damage would be required? All of it. Simultaneously. Across their entire fleet. Kethvar felt the collective consciousness of his people recoil from the implications. Captain, you are describing total warfare. Complete destruction of the enemy without mercy or quarter. I'm describing the only strategy that will work against an enemy that literally eats conventional weapons. Elder Hithyar materialized beside Kethvar, her form pulsing urgent orange. Captain, surely there must be alternatives. Negotiation, perhaps, or finding ways to redirect their consumption toward uninhabited systems. Chen's expression shifted to something that might have been sympathy. Ambassador, I monitored your communications during our reconnaissance. These creatures have no language, no individual consciousness, and no apparent motivation beyond consumption. They are not a civilization to be negotiated with. They are a natural disaster that thinks. All sentient life has value, Hithyar insisted. Even these creatures must have some purpose, some place in the natural order of things. Their purpose appears to be ending other species' place in the natural order, Chen replied bluntly. Ambassador, how many civilizations have you tried to negotiate with them? 7, Kethvar admitted. All attempts at communication failed. And how many of those civilizations still exist? Silence. Captain, Mothrin interjected. What specifically are you proposing? Chen activated a tactical display showing the human fleet's preliminary battle plan. Coordinated kinetic bombardment using relativistic projectiles, followed by nuclear weapons deployed inside their regeneration centers, concluded with targeted biological warfare designed to disrupt their cellular reproduction mechanisms. The council chamber erupted in shocked color displays. Several elders shifted to colors indicating severe moral distress. Biological warfare? Zepterra pulsed horrified red. Captain, such weapons are banned by every galactic convention. Banned for use against civilized species, Chen corrected. These creatures are not signatories to any galactic conventions. They are not protected by any treaties. They are an existential threat to all biological life in the galaxy. The precedent alone, Mothrin began. Elder, there will be no precedent if your species is extinct. Dead civilizations do not contribute to legal discussions. Kethvar studied the human battle plan. Whether that is good or bad depends on who you consider worthy of protection. Hithyar pulsed desperate yellow. Surely there must be intermediate approaches. Less destructive methods that still achieve victory. Elder, intermediate approaches against the Devourers have failed 17 times. Moderate methods got 17 civilizations completely consumed. Half measures result in total defeat. And your extreme methods guarantee victory? Chen paused. No. They guarantee that we will inflict maximum possible damage on the enemy before we die. Victory depends on whether maximum damage proves sufficient. You admit your plan might fail? Every plan might fail, Elder. The difference is that our plan will make the Devourers pay the highest possible price for their victory. Future species facing similar threats will benefit from our example. Kethvar felt the weight of decision settling on the council. They were being asked to authorize actions that violated every principle their civilization had developed over thousands of years. But the alternative was extinction, and extinct species contributed nothing to galactic morality. What do you require from us? He asked finally. Complete tactical coordination with your military forces, unrestricted access to your weapons production facilities, and authorization to modify your defensive systems according to human specifications. Modify our defenses how? Ambassador, your energy shields are designed to deflect attacks. We need to convert them into weapons that will contain the Devourers while we destroy them. You want to turn our planetary defense grid into an execution chamber, Mothrin said flatly. I want to turn your planetary defense grid into the most effective possible tool for ensuring your species survives the next 30 days. The chamber fell silent as the council processed this. Through their telepathic links, Kethvar could feel the moral struggle rippling across their entire civilization. They were being forced to choose between their principles and their survival. Captain, Hithyar asked quietly, what happens to us if we win? What kind of civilization will we be after employing such methods? You will be a living civilization instead of a dead one. Whether that is better or worse is something your philosophers can debate after the threat has been eliminated. And if our philosophers decide that survival at such a cost is not worth having, Chin's expression hardened. Then, your philosophers are welcome to commit suicide after we have saved them from extinction. But they do not have the right to make that decision for your children. The chamber erupted again. Several elders shifted to angry red frequencies, while others pulsed confused yellows and blues. The human captain had struck at the heart of their moral framework by distinguishing between individual choice and collective survival. The children are listening, Vithel reported. They can sense our distress through the connection. They are asking questions we cannot answer. Then, let us give them answers they can live with, Kethvar said finally. Literally. He turned to face the full council, his form shifting to the deep blue of reluctant but final decision. I call for emergency authorization of the human battle plan. Full tactical cooperation, complete resource access, authorization to modify our defense systems according to their specifications. Seconded, Hithyar said quietly. Opposition noted but overruled by survival necessity, Mothrin added. The vote is unanimous under crisis protocols. Chin nodded. Understood. My fleet will begin arriving within 6 hours. Ambassador, I need you to understand something about the next few days. What? Your people are going to see things that will give them nightmares for generations. Human military operations are not clean or honorable or pleasant to watch. If your species has any members who should be protected from psychological trauma, get them to safety now. Captain, we are a unified consciousness. We cannot protect some without protecting all. Then, prepare your entire species for the reality of total warfare. Because that is what survival is going to cost. The transmission ended, leaving the council alone with their decision. Outside their chamber, the Devourer fleet continued its inexorable consumption of their world, unaware that their next meal was preparing to fight back with methods that violated every principle of civilized warfare. Kethvar felt the collective consciousness of his people adjust to their new reality. They had hired humanity to save them from extinction. Whether humanity would save them from themselves remained to be seen. But, for the first time in 2 years, the HFY had hope. Even if that hope came wrapped in moral compromise that would haunt them forever. The human fleet arrived like a plague of mechanical locusts, 17 vessels that should not have been able to move in formation, yet somehow maintained perfect coordination despite using completely different propulsion systems. Admiral Sarah Chun watched from the bridge of her flagship as her task force took positions around the dying HFY world. Admiral, the alien defense grid is ready for modification, reported Commander Willis from the tactical station. Their energy output is impressive, but the targeting systems are designed for precision rather than area denial. Fix that, Chin ordered. I want those shields converted into containment fields within 12 hours. If any Devourer ship escapes this system, it will warn the others about our capabilities. Understood. Engineering teams are already integrating our targeting computers with their power systems. Chin studied the tactical display. The Devourer fleet had grown during the past week, consuming increasing amounts of the HFY homeworld's mass to fuel their reproduction. 47 ships had become 53, each one larger and more sophisticated than the last. Time is working against us, she observed. Every day we delay gives them more resources to work with. Admiral, Science Officer Park interrupted. I've completed analysis of the biological samples we collected during reconnaissance. The results are disturbing. Explain. The Devourers are not a naturally evolved species. They're artificial constructs, designed specifically for galactic conquest. Someone created them as weapons. Chun felt cold certainty settle in her stomach. Who? Unknown. The technology is beyond anything in our databases. But, Admiral, whoever built these things built them to be unstoppable. They have backup systems for their backup systems, redundant regeneration mechanisms, and adaptive capabilities that border on precognitive. Weaknesses? 1. Maybe. The control network that coordinates their fleet behavior appears to be centralized in the largest ship. If we can disrupt that network, the individual vessels should lose coordination. Admiral, we're guessing. These things are so far outside normal biological parameters that our models might be completely wrong. Chen nodded. Military plans always involve guesswork when facing unknown enemies. The trick was making sure your guesses were better informed than your enemies. Admiral, Communications Officer Martinez reported, we're receiving a transmission from Ambassador Kethvar. He requests permission to speak with you privately. Put him through to my ready room. Chen made her way to the small chamber adjacent to the bridge, noting the concerned expressions on her crew's faces. They were about to attempt something that had never been tried before, the complete destruction of an adaptive enemy using weapons and tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. If they succeeded, humanity would be remembered as the species that saved galactic civilization through necessary brutality. If they failed, they would be remembered as the species that died trying methods too extreme for anyone else to attempt. Ambassador Kethvar appeared on the ready room's display, his crystalline form pulsing with colors that Chun had learned to interpret as extreme anxiety. Admiral Chun, I must speak frankly with you about my people's concerns. Go ahead, Ambassador. Your fleet's modifications to our defense systems have created weapons of unprecedented destructive capability. Our scientists estimate that the energy output could sterilize entire star systems. That's correct. Admiral, such weapons could threaten every species in the galaxy. Once this crisis is resolved, what prevents humanity from using similar systems against other civilizations? Chen leaned back in her chair. The question was inevitable, and she had been preparing for it since accepting this mission. Ambassador, let me ask you a question. Before the Devourers arrived, did your species possess weapons capable of destroying entire planets? Yes, but such weapons were never used. They existed only as deterrents. And now you have weapons capable of destroying entire star systems. The moral equation hasn't changed, Ambassador. You still have to choose not to use them. But humans have demonstrated willingness to employ extreme methods when circumstances demand it. We have demonstrated willingness to employ effective methods when survival depends on it. Whether those methods are extreme depends on your perspective. Kethvar's form pulsed through several colors before settling on confused yellow. Admiral, I do not understand the distinction. Chun activated a historical display showing human military conflicts over the past 2 centuries. Ambassador, humans have fought 17 major wars since joining galactic civilization. In 6 of those conflicts, we possessed weapons capable of completely destroying our enemies' homeworlds. Did you use such weapons? We used exactly as much force as necessary to achieve our objectives, no more and no less. Sometimes that meant limited engagement with minimal casualties. Sometimes it meant total warfare with complete destruction of enemy military capabilities. And how did you determine which approach to use? By the enemy's behavior. Species that were willing to negotiate found us reasonable and restrained. Species that sought to exterminate others found us implacable and ruthless. Kethvar processed this information. You are saying that human behavior adapts to match enemy intentions. I'm saying that human behavior adapts to ensure human survival and the protection of our allies. If that requires being gentle and diplomatic, we can do that. If it requires being utterly merciless, we can do that too. And the Devourers? The Devourers have demonstrated clear intent to exterminate all biological life in the galaxy. Therefore, our response will be calibrated accordingly. The transmission paused as Kethvar presumably consulted with his council. When it resumed, several other alien figures had joined him. Admiral, Elder Hithyar spoke for the first time. Our philosophers have been debating the moral implications of our alliance with your species. We find ourselves troubled by a fundamental question, which is, if we employ your methods to defeat the Devourers, what prevents us from becoming the next threat that future civilizations must hire mercenaries to defeat? Chen smiled grimly. Elder, that's the right question to ask. The fact that you're asking it suggests you understand the answer. We do not understand. The difference between necessary violence and unnecessary violence is choice. After we defeat the Devourers, your species will have choices about how to use the capabilities we've given you. Make good choices. And if we make poor choices, then other species will have choices about how to respond to your threats. The galaxy is full of species that prefer negotiation to warfare, Elder. But it's also full of species that will fight when fighting becomes necessary, including humanity, especially humanity. Elder Mothrin materialized beside Hithyar, his form pulsing aggressive orange. Admiral, you are describing a galaxy where every species must be prepared for total warfare at any moment. Elder, I'm describing the galaxy that already exists. The Devourers didn't change the fundamental nature of reality. They just reminded everyone that extinction is always possible. Before the Devourers, civilized warfare had rules. Before the Devourers, civilized warfare worked because everyone agreed to follow the same rules. But, Elder, those rules only work when everyone follows them. When someone breaks the rules, everyone else has to decide whether to lose honorably or win dishonorably. The chamber fell silent as the aliens absorbed this. Chen could see the philosophical crisis playing out in their changing colors. They were discovering that moral principles had to be balanced against survival needs. Admiral, Kethvar said finally, assume we succeed in defeating the Devourers. What happens next? Next, your species goes back to making its own choices about its own future. We return to human space, and you return to TH-Carry space. That's simple. That's simple. Ambassador, humans don't want to conquer the galaxy. We want to make sure the galaxy remains conquerable by no one. Explain. We want to maintain a balance where every species is strong enough to defend itself, but not so strong that it threatens everyone else. The Devourers upset that balance by being stronger than any possible resistance. And after they are defeated, we will work to ensure that nothing like them can threaten galactic civilization again. How? Chen paused. The honest answer would probably terrify the aliens, but they deserved honesty. By making sure that every species has access to weapons and tactics sufficient to defeat any future threat, including weapons and tactics sufficient to defeat humanity if we ever become a threat. The transmission went silent for a long moment. When it resumed, all the aliens present were displaying colors that Chen interpreted as profound shock. Admiral, Hithyar said slowly, you are proposing to arm every species in the galaxy with weapons capable of destroying human civilization. I'm proposing to make sure that no species, including humanity, ever becomes strong enough to threaten everyone else simultaneously. But humans will retain superior military knowledge. For now, but military knowledge spreads, Elder. Eventually, every species that wants to learn human methods will learn them. Our advantage is temporary. And you are comfortable with this? I am comfortable with a galaxy where humanity survives because we are useful allies, not because we are undefeatable enemies. Kethvar's form shifted to deep blue, indicating serious contemplation. Admiral, you are describing a balance of terror. I'm describing a balance of respect. Terror fades when people become accustomed to it. Respect endures when it is based on demonstrated capability and restraint. Admiral, Martinez's voice interrupted through the comm system. All human vessels report ready for combat operations. Alien defense modifications are complete. Chen stood. Ambassador, it's time. Are your people prepared for what comes next? Admiral, no one could be prepared for what comes next. But we are ready. Good enough. Chun returned to the bridge, where her crew was making final preparations for the most morally questionable military operation in human history. They were about to demonstrate that any enemy, no matter how advanced or adaptive, could be defeated through sufficient application of violence and complete disregard for conventional limitations. The galaxy would remember this day. Whether they remembered it as salvation or as the beginning of a new age of total warfare depended on choices that had not yet been made. But first, the Devourers had to die, and Chen's fleet was ready to teach the galaxy exactly how thorough humanity could be when survival was at stake. The final battle began without ceremony or declaration, starting with a single human vessel launching what appeared to be a communications probe toward the largest Devourer ship. Ambassador Kethvar watched from the TH-Carry Command Center as the probe approached the massive organic vessel, seemingly ignored by its defensive systems. What is the purpose of that device? Elder Mothrin asked. The Devourers do not communicate. I do not believe it is intended for communication, Kethvar replied, studying the human tactical displays that Admiral Chun had shared with them. The probe made contact with the Devourer command ship's hull and immediately began boring through the biomechanical armor with cutting tools that should not have been effective against adaptive organic matter. Instead of trying to slice cleanly through the creature's defenses, the probe was deliberately creating ragged, traumatic wounds that triggered massive regenerative responses. They are not trying to penetrate the ship, Tactical Coordinator Vithel realized. They are trying to make it waste energy on healing. The command ship's response was immediate and massive. Biological systems throughout the creature began converting stored mass into energy to fuel rapid healing of the probe's damage. Other Devourer ships moved to assist, establishing energy transfer links to support their command vessel's regeneration efforts. Now I understand, Kethvar said. Admiral Chun is forcing the entire fleet to commit to a single location. The moment the Devourer fleet established its mutual support network, every human ship in the system opened fire simultaneously. But they were not targeting the enemy vessels directly. Instead, they were targeting the space around them with overlapping fields of relativistic projectiles that made evasive maneuvering impossible. Containment, Vithel breathed. They have trapped the entire fleet in a single engagement zone. What followed was unlike any battle in recorded galactic history. The humans were not trying to destroy their enemies with superior firepower. They were systematically overwhelming the Devourer's adaptive capabilities by attacking with more different methods than the creatures could simultaneously counter. Kinetic bombardment was followed by nuclear weapons, then biological warfare agents, then exotic energy weapons that the Teichkari sensors could not identify. Each attack was calibrated to trigger specific defensive responses from the Devourer fleet, forcing them to expend energy and resources in precise amounts calculated to exhaust their regenerative capabilities. It is a mathematical equation, Kethvar realized. Admiral Chun is not fighting them. She is solving them. The Devourers adapted to each human attack with impressive speed, developing countermeasures and defensive modifications that should have made them increasingly difficult to damage. But the humans had anticipated this response, and each new defensive adaptation only served to make the creatures more vulnerable to subsequent attacks. They are learning themselves to death, Elder Hithyar observed with horrified fascination. Each adaptation makes them more specialized, less able to counter multiple simultaneous threats. The battle continued for 18 hours. Not 18 hours of constant action, but 18 hours of carefully orchestrated pressure designed to force the Devourer fleet into an unsustainable energy expenditure cycle. Human attacks would escalate until the creatures committed to major adaptive responses, then, suddenly, cease, allowing the enemy to waste resources on defenses that were no longer needed. Psychological warfare against non-psychological entities, Mothrin said. How is this possible? Because humans do not distinguish between psychology and biology, Kethvar replied. To them, behavior is simply another system to be analyzed and exploited. The end came with shocking suddenness. After 18 hours of systematic exhaustion, the Devourer fleet's regenerative capabilities finally collapsed. When the next wave of human attacks arrived, the creatures could no longer adapt quickly enough to counter them. Massive biomechanical ships began suffering cascading organ failures as their overtaxed biological systems shut down one after another. Admiral Chin's voice crackled through the Teichkari communication system. All vessels, initiate final phase. Complete destruction of all enemy assets. No survivors, no remains, no possibility of regeneration. What followed was the methodical annihilation of 53 massive ships that had consumed 17 civilizations. Human vessels moved through the dying fleet like surgeons, ensuring that every fragment of Devourer tissue was completely destroyed. Nuclear weapons vaporized organic matter, while exotic energy weapons dismantled the creatures at the molecular level. Overkill, Mothrin observed. Thoroughness, Kethvar corrected. They are ensuring that this enemy cannot regenerate from any remaining biological material. When the battle finally ended, Nothing remained of the Devourer fleet except expanding clouds of ionized particles that bore no resemblance to their former configuration as living vessels. The threat that had consumed 17 civilizations had been eliminated so completely that no trace of their existence remained. Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main display in the TH-Carry Command Center. Her expression was tired but satisfied, showing none of the moral anguish that any civilized being should feel after participating in such complete destruction. Ambassador Kethvar, the immediate threat to your world has been eliminated. My fleet will remain in system for 72 hours to ensure no Devourer remnants survived our attack. Admiral, we are grateful beyond expression. Your species has saved our civilization. Your species hired us to do a job, Ambassador. We completed the contract according to specifications. Kethvar paused, uncertain how to process such casual treatment of an act that amounted to the salvation of his entire species. Admiral, what payment do you require for your services? Chen smiled, though her expression remained somewhat cold. Payment has already been arranged through diplomatic channels. Your government has agreed to provide certain technological specifications and research access in exchange for our intervention. That seems insufficient compensation for what you have accomplished. Ambassador, the real payment was the knowledge we gained about our own capabilities. We now know that adaptive enemies can be defeated through systematic exhaustion of their defensive systems. This information will be invaluable when we face similar threats in the future. Elder Hithyar joined the conversation, her form pulsing with colors that indicated deep philosophical distress. Admiral, our civilization has been forever changed by what we have witnessed. How do we return to normal existence after seeing such thoroughness in warfare? Elder, you don't return to normal existence. You build a new normal that incorporates what you have learned about the universe. Which is what? That survival sometimes requires abandoning principles that feel more important than life itself. Your species chose survival over moral purity. Now you have to live with that choice. And if we find that we cannot live with it, Chen's expression softened slightly. Then, you find ways to make the choice worthwhile. Use your survival to accomplish things that justify the moral costs of staying alive. Kethvar felt the weight of this responsibility settling on his people's collective consciousness. They had purchased their survival with actions that violated everything they had believed about civilized behavior. The psychological price would be paid for generations. Admiral, he said finally, will human forces remain available for similar situations in the future? Humanity will continue to respond to existential threats against galactic civilization. But, Ambassador, I hope this is the last time such extreme measures prove necessary. And if they do prove necessary again, then we will employ them again. The galaxy is full of potential threats, Ambassador. Some can be negotiated with, some can be deterred, some can be contained. But some can only be destroyed completely. How do we determine which category a particular threat falls into? Chen paused thoughtfully. By trying the reasonable approaches first. Diplomacy, economic pressure, defensive measures. If those fail, and extinction becomes the alternative, then you call us. The transmission ended, leaving the TH-Carry leadership alone with their new reality. Their world was safe, their species would survive, and their civilization would continue. But they would never again be the people they had been before making the choice to hire humanity. The children are asking questions again, Vithel reported. They want to know if we are still the same people who refuse to harm others. Kethvar considered this. Through their telepathic links, he could feel young TH-Carry across their world struggling to understand how their peaceable society had participated in such complete destruction of an enemy. Tell them, he said finally, that we are the same people who chose to survive rather than die beautifully. Tell them that sometimes survival requires ugly choices, but that making ugly choices does not make us ugly people. And if they ask whether we would make the same choice again, tell them that we hope never to face that question again. But if we do, Kethvar's form shifted to the deep blue of absolute certainty. Tell them that we will always choose survival over principle, because dead species cannot improve their principles. Outside their chamber, the human fleet was already preparing to depart. Their work here was finished, and other crises undoubtedly awaited their attention elsewhere in the galaxy. They had arrived as salvation and departed as a reminder that salvation often came at prices no one wanted to pay. The HFY had begged humans for salvation. They had received it, along with the knowledge that begging had been their first step away from the moral certainty that had defined their species for millennia. It was, Ambassador HFY realized, exactly what they had needed, and exactly what they would spend the rest of their existence trying to forgive themselves for needing. The heresy was complete. His people had chosen survival over principles, effectiveness over honor, ugly victory over beautiful defeat. They would never be the same. But they would be alive to regret their choices, and sometimes that was the best outcome available in a universe that offered no guarantees about the moral costs of survival. The humans had taught them that lesson with characteristic thoroughness. Now the HFY would have to decide what to do with their hard-won knowledge that even the most civilized species could choose necessary brutality when extinction was the alternative. It was a lesson the galaxy would be learning for generations to come.